a struggling widower took in a starving mother and her 5 children, unaware they will change his life forever. The wind came in slow, not howling, but breathing, soft and cold, like a secret the earth had kept too long. Snow clung to the bones of the plains, settling quiet on broken fences and forgotten trails. The frost feathered over the dead branches of cottonwoods and the warped planks of an old ranch house, its roof sagging like it, too, had given up. No birds, no hooves, no sound but the sigh of a world holding its breath. Levi Carter's boots sank into the snow with every step, thick leather cracking beneath layers of frozen mud. A lantern swung from his gloved hand, casting a warm ring of gold against the white dusk. His breath rose in steam as he crested the hill above his late wife's ranch, the house she died in, the house he couldn't bring himself to burn. He didn't come here often, but something, maybe memory, or maybe just the need to keep the wolves from sniffing too close, had pulled him down that trail today. He scanned the fields out of habit. That's when he saw it, just beyond the splintered fence. A shape, too small to be livestock, too still to be nothing. Levi stepped closer, boots crunching through the crust of snow. His heartbeat slowed, as if preparing itself for grief. The bundle wasn't one. It was many. 5 small bodies, huddled close, arms tangled like roots under a winter tree. And in the middle of them all, barely upright, shaking with the cold, was a woman. Her face was gray, lips cracked, eyes hollow and wide. Her hair, dark and undone, stuck in frozen ropes to her shawl. She didn't beg, didn't flinch, just pulled the little boy closer into her chest. "Ma'am," Levi said, his voice low and uncertain in the quiet. "You alive?" She blinked slow, as if the word didn't belong to her anymore. One of the girls, no older than 8, whimpered softly. Levi knelt down. "You got names?" Still nothing, just trembling. He reached out, touched the woman's hand. Ice under wool. He didn't ask again. They were lighter than they looked. Bones and rags and silence. The oldest boy he lifted in his arms, and the others followed like shadows. The woman he didn't carry, not out of cruelty, but out of something gentler. She stood barely and leaned into him without a word, her shoulder against his arm as if her body remembered what trust was even if her mind forgot. By the time they reached the cabin, Levi's lantern had burned low. He pushed the door open with his boot, the warmth of the hearth meeting them like a small, stunned miracle. The place was rough. 2 rooms, 1 stove, a table scarred with knife marks, and a single photograph on the wall. A woman with a crooked smile and eyes like firelight. "Lily." Levi set the boy down on the cot and turned to the others. "Y'all can sit," he said. "Ain't gonna hurt none." The children didn't speak, but the girl with the braid touched the back of the chair before sitting. Another boy followed, rubbing his eyes with a fist the size of a biscuit. Levi stoked the fire, poured water, laid bread on the table and a small hunk of cheese, more than he could afford to lose, but less than they needed. The woman stood by the door still, shivering, her arms wrapped around herself. "You want the chair or the floor?" he asked. She didn't answer, just looked at the children, counted them in her head like they might disappear if she didn't. Levi walked over and tugged a quilt from the hooks near the stove. Without ceremony, he wrapped it around her shoulders. "You're safe enough," he said, his voice softer now. "Ain't nobody here but me and Lily's memory." That was all. He went back to the fire, poured hot water into chipped mugs, and listened as the wood popped and the storm thickened outside. When he turned back around, she had sunk to the floor beside the stove. The children were asleep where they sat, small chests rising and falling beneath layers of borrowed cloth. One of the girls, the one with freckles and pink ears, had her head on her sister's lap. Levi poured another mug and set it down near the woman's hand. She didn't take it, but he saw her eyes flick toward it like a starving thing pretending not to want meat. He didn't push, just sat in his old rocker, let the silence settle, and watched the snow slide down the window in crooked streaks of melting. It was hours before she spoke. "May," she whispered, voice hoarse and breaking. "My name's May." Levi didn't move. "All right." She hesitated. "They're mine." "I figured." She looked over at him then, and for the first time, he saw more than bones. There was fire behind the bruises. Not rage. Not even fear. Just a mother's burn. That deep, dull ache to keep 5 hearts beating when her own barely had the strength to carry them. "Thank you," she said. He nodded. "Ain't done much yet." That was the first night. The second came quiet, with less snow and a deeper hunger in the cabin. Levi gave up his portion of cornbread without mention. May spooned broth into the baby's mouth with the care of someone who'd learned to stretch love further than food. The children didn't speak often, but one, Hattie, the braid girl, followed Levi with her eyes wherever he went. When he knelt to fix a floorboard, she handed him a nail. When he stood, she stepped back with the small, solemn grace of someone who'd learned too young to be invisible. On the 4th day, Levi found her at the hearth alone, tracing the edge of a leather glove with her finger. "You all right there?" he asked. She didn't speak, but her mouth moved, and then, finally, she nodded. Barely. That night, as the wind moaned against the cabin walls, May turned to Levi. "You don't know us." "No." "Why'd you bring us in?" Levi stared into the fire. "Cole don't care about names." "Neither do I." She breathed, slow and sharp, like the answer hurt and healed all at once. Later, as the children lay curled like kittens beneath his dead wife's quilts, May lingered at the doorway. Snow fell again, quieter this time. She pulled the shawl tighter around her and looked out. Levi approached, but didn't touch her. His hand hovered near her back, then fell. "They ain't safe out there," he said. "I know." She turned to face him, something unreadable in her eyes. "You got room." Levi looked past her to the cabin behind. The lopsided roof. The fire. The ghost of Lily smiling above the table. "Not really," he said. "But I got space." Her mouth quirked, almost a smile. Then she stepped past him, back inside. And that's when Levi noticed the boy, Caleb, maybe, had tied a red ribbon to the doorpost, like a mark. He hadn't noticed it before. But he would, especially when it vanished by morning. The morning began with the soft crackle of kindling and the rhythmic sound of chopping. Levi outside splitting logs before the sun had burned through the frost on the windows. Inside, the cabin was a quilt of hushed breaths and tangled limbs. May sat beside the stove, her back straight, arms wrapped around her knees, eyes half-lidded, but awake. She hadn't slept, not really. Sleep felt too much like surrender. The children stirred as the warmth spread. Caleb was first, stretching long and silent like a colt unaccustomed to safety. Then Sadie and Hattie, whose feet found each other under the quilt. Joey, the baby, murmured something dream-soft and nestled deeper into May's side. There was no sound of crying, no panic, just the cautious stillness of people unused to waking safe. May's fingers ran absently over the fabric of the quilt, the seams worn but firm. Everything in this place had been used, repaired, and kept. Nothing new, nothing wasteful. And somehow, everything still had breath in it. Levi entered with a gust of cold, snow in his beard, arms full of wood. He met May's eyes, nodded once, and moved to stack the pile by the hearth. "You need water?" he asked. She hesitated. "I can fetch it." He glanced toward the frozen well. "Best I do it. Ice crusts over by this hour." She didn't argue, just pressed her lips together and stood, adjusting the shawl around her shoulders. The children had begun to move now, rubbing eyes, reaching for each other in instinctive patterns of comfort. May poured a little broth into a tin cup and handed it to Joey, who took it with both hands like it was gold. As Levi stepped back out, Caleb followed him, wordless but determined. May watched from a window as the boy stumbled a little over the snow and righted himself, lifting the second bucket like it mattered that he try. May knelt to tend to the stove, but her hand paused mid-motion. There, beside the firewood, was a child's drawing, a bit of parchment covered in wax pencil marks. A house, 5 stick figures, and a 6th drawn later, smaller, standing nearby. Her heart twisted in her chest. She tucked it into her apron without looking at it again. When Levi and Caleb returned, both dusted with frost, May had already begun making a thin oat mash with the last of the grain. She didn't ask permission, just moved quiet and steady, like it was what her hands knew how to do. Levi didn't stop her. They ate together. Not as a family, not yet, but not as strangers either. Levi passed cups. May ladled. Caleb helped Joey blow on his spoon. There was no laughter, but there was chewing, swallowing. That, May thought, was a kind of music too. Afterward, Levi mended a harness at the table, while May brushed the girl's hair by the stove. Hattie winced when the comb hit a knot, and May stilled, fingers trembling. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "It's okay," Hattie said, blinking up at her. "It don't hurt like it used to." May said nothing, but the comb slowed, turned softer. The hours passed like snow, silent and small, until suddenly the whole day had drifted past. May took a walk around the cabin while the children napped. She needed the air. The cold bit her cheeks and turned her breath to clouds. But the sky above was sharp and blue. There was a tree stump just beyond the barn, and she sat on it, wrapping her arms around herself and watching the wind push snow across the prairie like restless ghosts. She didn't hear Levi until he was behind her. "Was Lily kind?" she asked, not turning. He took his time answering. She had fire in her, knew every neighbor's name. Once told a preacher his sermon lacked courage. May smiled just a little. Sounds like she wasn't afraid. "She was afraid," Levi said, voice low. "She just didn't wait for fear to leave before she did the right thing." May looked down at her hands. "I waited too long." "You waited until you had no choice." She blinked. "That ain't much better." "It's still alive," he said. "That's better than most." She didn't speak again. They stood there in silence until Joey's voice carried faint from the porch. "Mama." May stood slowly, brushing snow from her skirts. She turned to walk back, but paused just beside Levi. "If I help cook, will you let me earn our keep?" He looked at her, straight and steady. "You don't owe me debt." "I don't want pity." He held her gaze. "Then I won't give you any." Their eyes held something longer than words, something old and aching and new at once. She turned, walked back inside, and for the first time in weeks, she stood at a stove with purpose. That evening, Levi fixed the back door latch, Caleb helping again with careful hands. May swept the floor, humming low under her breath. Hattie listened from the quilt pile, trying to catch the tune. Joey clutched a wooden spoon and followed her like a duckling. Later, when the cabin settled into its hush, May sat with the baby curled into her lap and the fire casting warm shadows on the walls. Levi sat across from her, oil lamp between them. He rubbed his hands slowly, not looking at her, but not avoiding her either. "Your man left you?" he asked softly. She nodded. "Took the deed, the mule, and most of the food." "He family." "Was supposed to be." He didn't push further, just leaned back in his chair. "You think he's coming back?" he asked after a long stretch of crackling wood and ticking clock. "No," she said. Then with a hollow laugh, "And if he does, he won't like who's waiting." Levi looked at her then, really looked. "You strong enough to fight him?" She didn't smile. "No." "Then, but I'm strong enough to stay." He nodded. "That's the fight that matters." They fell quiet again. The stove hissed. The wind tapped soft on the window like it was listening. May finally stood and tucked the children in. She lingered at the girl's side, fingers running across their hair with slow reverence. Then she paused at the door. Levi looked up. "You're Lily," she said. "Would she hate us being here?" He shook his head once. Lily hated wasted space. She'd want it full. May stared at him a long moment, and then she stepped outside. He heard the door creak open, heard the hush of her boots in the snow. A minute passed. 2. When he finally rose and opened it, she was kneeling at the base of the porch, her breath fogging around her in bursts. She was tying a ribbon to the doorpost. The same one Caleb had tied days before. Only this time, it was her hands doing it. "Why?" he asked gently. May didn't look back. "Because a woman ought to know when she's come home." She rose, brushing her hands on her skirt, but something in her face changed, froze, as she turned. Across the snow, at the edge of the darkening field, a figure stood still, watching. Then it turned and walked into the trees. The snow began to melt in slow trickles, dripping from the eaves and soaking the soil like an apology. The wind shifted, no longer bitter, but wet and uncertain, spring trying to shoulder its way through winter's grip. Levi stepped out that morning with a list in his head and a crease in his brow. The supplies were low again, and the horses needed oats. He didn't want to go into town, but necessity leaves no room for preference. May stood on the porch with the baby on her hip, eyes sweeping the horizon like she expected the shadows to move again. Since the night she'd seen the figure at the treeline, she hadn't spoken of it. Levi hadn't asked, but she'd started bolting the door at night. "You want company?" she asked quietly as he hitched the wagon. "No need," he replied, tossing the reins across the bench. Still, her fingers tightened on the shawl at her chest. Levi noticed, and because he didn't know what to do with her worry, he tipped his hat and said, "Won't be long." The road into town was slush and ruts, the wheels jerking now, and then like the wagon didn't want to go either. Levi passed fields that had once held cattle, now nothing but frostbitten earth. It was a hard winter for everyone. People were thin and patience thinner. He arrived just as the general store opened, its bell tinkling with hollow cheer. Inside, the warmth stank of tobacco and dried beans. Mrs. Abernathy, with her tight bun and tighter smile, looked up from behind the counter. "Well, if it ain't Levi Carter," she drawled. "Haven't seen you since the snow came." "Didn't have much reason to come," he replied, scanning the shelves. "You do now," she said, voice sharp with interest. "Word is you've taken in quite the little collection out there." Levi didn't flinch. "They're hungry. I got space." "Hum," she murmured, sliding a jar of molasses into a sack. "Mercy's one thing. Taking in someone else's mistakes is another." He glanced up, slow. "You sell flour or sermons, missus?" The room cooled. Another man coughed behind him. Levi paid and turned without another word. But the seed had been sown. By the time he reached the smithy, the whispers had grown legs. Mrs. Holler, the preacher's wife, looked him up and down outside the churchyard and said with feigned sweetness, "We'll pray for your household, Levi. It's a heavy thing to carry strangers, especially when children start repeating what they hear." Levi's jaw worked, but he kept walking. What he didn't know, what he couldn't yet know, was that May had decided to come into town that same morning. She'd bundled the children in what they had and hitched the mule to the small cart, hoping to trade sewing for sugar or candles. Her hands trembled the entire way, one hand clutching the reins, the other pressed to Joey's leg to keep him steady. Caleb sat beside her, tense and too quiet. She didn't want to be seen, but she couldn't keep hiding. When she reached town, folks stared, not with curiosity, but with judgment. She was the woman in Levi Carter's cabin, the one with 5 children and no ring. May kept her eyes forward and her chin level, but each glance felt like a stone thrown. The girls clung to the hem of her skirt. One boy asked if they were beggars. A woman pulled her daughter closer and muttered shameless beneath her breath. At the mercantile, May stood in line behind 3 men and waited. Joey coughed once. Hattie rubbed his back. The clerk behind the counter barely looked at her. "I have some stitching work," she said carefully. "Fine hands. I can mend for trade." "We don't do that," the clerk replied, not meeting her eyes. "But I was told." He looked up then. "Maybe ask Carter to buy what you need." May felt the flush rise to her cheeks. Her hands trembled, but she refused to let the tears come. Instead, she turned and led the children out without another word. That's when she saw him. Roy Maddox, her husband's brother. He leaned against a post like he owned the town, whiskey breath visible even in the weak sun. His eyes narrowed when he saw her, and his lip curled. "Well, well," he called, loud enough to gather ears. "If it ain't the ice widow herself. Didn't think you had the spine to crawl out of your hole." May froze. Caleb moved to stand in front of her, trembling but proud. "Leave her alone." Roy laughed loud and mean. "What's this? One of yours, May? Or one of Carter's? Hard to tell, ain't it, when she plays house like that?" May turned to go, but Roy stepped forward, grabbing her arm hard enough to leave marks. "You think shacking up with a widower makes you decent? You think you can take land that ain't yours and live like?" A hand closed around Roy's wrist, firm and cold. "Levi." No warning, no announcement, just presence. "Let go," Levi said. Roy hesitated. But something in Levi's stillness made even a drunk man flinch. He dropped May's arm and stepped back, sneering. "She ain't yours, Carter." Levi didn't move. "Ain't no one's to own." Roy spat. "You'll regret it. You keep harboring trash, you'll end up with the flies." Levi's voice didn't rise. "Get off my road." Roy staggered off, cursing under his breath. May stood frozen, eyes fixed on Levi, cheeks burning with shame and rage. "I didn't want to come," she said, voice thin. I needed to help." "You don't owe this town a thing," Levi answered. Then, gentler, "Next time wait for me." Back at the cabin, the children were quiet. Even the fire seemed hesitant. May busied herself, cleaning, folding, checking pots that didn't need checking. Levi stood outside long after sunset, hands in pockets, breath fogging in the twilight. That night, had he crawled into May's lap and whispered, "Why did that man hate you?" May held her close. "Because people fear what they don't understand." Levi watched from the doorway, unseen. Later, when the children slept, May sat by the fire, sewing a torn hem. Levi spoke softly behind her. "I know what folks are saying." May didn't look up. "You don't need to defend me." "I'm not." Silence. "I'm choosing you," he said, like it was a fact carved in stone. May's hand stilled. Her breath caught. But before she could answer, a knock came, sharp, fast, angry, on the cabin door. And outside, in the snow, hoof prints led to nowhere. The knock echoed once, then fell silent. It wasn't a loud sound, but it split the cabin wide. May flinched mid-stitch, needle pricking her thumb. Blood welled at the skin, bright against the dull cotton she'd been mending. Levi didn't move at first. Just stood by the stove, eyes narrowed, jaw still. Outside, the wind brushed along the walls like it, too, was waiting. A second knock. Firmer. Not demanding, but not gentle either. Levi opened the door slow. Wind flared in, sharp with dust and thaw. On the porch stood Preacher Ellison, coat buttoned tight, hat rim heavy with melting snow. He held no Bible, just a folded paper in one hand and a look like judgment in the other. "Evening," he said, though his tone offered no peace. Levi nodded. "Preacher." Ellison looked past him into the room. His eyes landed on May. She met them, without blinking, holding her needle like a defense. "There's been concern," the preacher said, stepping forward but not crossing the threshold. "Town's uneasy. Questions are being raised about the propriety of this arrangement." Levi said nothing. Ellison continued. "You've taken in a woman not your wife. 5 children not your kin. Folks are starting to wonder what sort of example that sets." May rose, voice cool and calm. "You mean what it threatens?" Ellison looked startled. "Pardon." She stepped closer, wiping her thumb on her apron. "A woman survives, keeps her children alive, accepts help. It unsettles people, makes them question the stories they tell about charity and worth." Levi's voice followed, steady as frost. "This is my home, and they're under it." Ellison pressed the paper forward. "The church council asks that the children attend Sunday school separately. The woman, too, until clarity is restored." Levi didn't take the paper. "We're not looking for pews." "You should be looking for God's order," the preacher snapped. May smiled without warmth. "I found God. He was in a cup of warm broth, in boots shared when mine split open, in a man who didn't ask for explanations before lighting his fire." Ellison's face flushed. "I'll pray for you." "Please do," she said softly. "We're tired." Levi closed the door, slow. The silence that followed was heavier than any storm. That night, May scrubbed the table until her knuckles ached. The wood gleamed, though it had never needed polishing. Levi carved in the corner, whittling small animals for Joey's fingers. No one spoke of the knock again. Not directly. But something shifted. The wind outside didn't carry her name anymore. It whispered questions instead, ones she had long stopped asking. May began waking before dawn, stepping out into the cold just to breathe. The hills stretched wide, white and gray, and her footprints looked like thread unraveling from a spool. She didn't walk far, just enough to remind herself she could. Inside the cabin, the rhythm held. Caleb hauled wood without being asked. Hattie swept the corners. Sadie began tracing letters in the ash on the hearth, curious. Joey followed Levi like a shadow. But May felt it. A space growing in her chest, not emptiness, not quite. A distance. Levi began working longer in the barn, fixing things that didn't need fixing. The silence between them was no longer peace. It was pause. One evening, she brought out Lily's shawl, the one she'd been given that first night, and folded it neatly. She placed it on the table beside Levi's supper. He glanced at it. Something wrong. I don't know how to stay where I'm not wanted, May said quietly. Levi stared at her. You think I don't want you? I think I bring trouble. You bring life. She shook her head, voice trembling. And you're paying for it. Every glance in town, every cold word from people who never gave you reason to be shamed before. You've built a life here. I don't want to be the thing that breaks it. Levi leaned back, slow. His hands rested on his thighs, steady. I lost my wife, lost my stock, thought I was done losing. May folded her arms. And now you're losing your place in town. I can live without a town, he said. But I can't live where my table's quiet and no one singing in the kitchen. I can't live without the sound of children laughing in the barn, or your footsteps at dawn. She blinked. You hear them? Every morning. The air between them pulsed, soft as breath, fragile as a thawing creek. Then May looked away. I don't want to stay if it means watching you shrink. Levi stood, crossed the room. He took her hands, gentle, but firm. Then don't stay for me, he said. Stay for the girl who never got to finish a meal. For the boy who learned to swing a hammer because no one else would. Stay for the child who thinks wind chimes are magic, and the baby who only just learned to sleep without crying. Her eyes welled, but she didn't let the tears fall. You're asking a lot. No, he whispered. I'm asking the only thing that matters. Stay because you want to. Stay and be wanted. She looked down, then slowly back up. And if I don't know what I want? He stepped back, not as rejection, but as offering. Then I won't stop you. You go when you're ready. That night, May couldn't sleep. She sat by the stove, watching the last of the logs burn to orange curls. The cabin creaked with the sound of weather and old wood. In the bedroom, the children sighed in sleep, safe. Her bag sat by the door. Not packed fully, just enough. At dawn, she rose, brushed Caleb's hair back, kissed Sadie's cheek, wrapped Joey in the quilt, and whispered something only he would remember. She looked at Levi once, asleep in his rocker, hand still holding the half-carved deer. She left quietly, the way she'd come. The wind outside was warm for once, soft. She walked along the path that led not to town, not to anyone, just away. But by mid-morning, the children noticed. Where's Mama? Sadie asked, voice small. Levi didn't answer, just walked outside, stood on the porch. The red ribbon she tied weeks ago was gone. In its place hung the small wooden deer, now finished, its eyes carved deep, its legs curled like it might leap. Caleb sat beside the door, holding the shawl. She left it. Levi nodded. She did. Inside, the table sat set. The hearth flickered. The home still stood. But the wind carried her name again. That afternoon, Joey wandered into the barn, found an old scarf of May's, and pulled it around his neck. He toddled outside, climbed onto the porch, and tied it to the post beside the deer. When Levi saw it, he didn't speak, just sat beside him, hands clasped. The next morning, a letter came, slipped under the door with no name. The handwriting was May's. The message was short. I thought I could leave, but even the wind misses me here. The fire had dimmed, not out, but quiet, embers glowing beneath the ash like hearts that refused to forget how to burn. Levi sat at the kitchen table with the letter in his hands, reading it for the third time, though it was only one sentence long. It had no greeting, no farewell, just a line carved in a woman's hand that trembled with want. I thought I could leave, but even the wind misses me here. The children moved slower since she'd gone. Not sad exactly, just incomplete, like a tune half-sung. Hattie asked fewer questions. Caleb checked the road each morning before chores. Sadie tied knots into the hem of her dress again. Joey had taken to clutching Levi's coat at night, burying his small face in the crook where May's shoulder once rested. The home still stood, but the warmth had settled into silence. 3 days passed, then 4. On the 5th, the wind turned strange, warmer than it should have been, with a bite of storm beneath it. Levi stood by the window at dusk, the light bending gold across the table. He watched the empty path, unmoving. It was Caleb who first cried out. "There!" The boy bolted through the door before anyone could stop him, bare feet slapping against the packed earth. She was walking slow, carrying a bundle under one arm, eyes fixed on the house like it might disappear if she looked away. Her braid was loose, her shawl stained with road dust. Her lip was cracked and her boots scuffed, but her eyes, they held light. May dropped the bundle. Turns out it was flour, wrapped in her coat, just in time for Caleb to crash into her waist. He held her like he'd never let go again. Hattie was next. Then Sadie. Then Joey, who clung to her skirts, babbling nonsense. She held them all, arms trembling, mouth trying to form words that her throat had forgotten how to shape. And Levi, he didn't move right away. He stood in the doorway, watching as if afraid the moment might vanish with a blink. But then her eyes found his, and she stepped forward. He met her halfway. She didn't say sorry. He didn't ask why. Some homecomings don't need speeches. Just breaths shared between two people who had once nearly given up on being chosen. Inside, May took off her boots and stood on the wood floor barefoot, like she needed to feel it to believe it was real. "I brought flour," she whispered. Levi smiled, the kind that begins in the eyes and takes its time reaching the mouth. "Good. We were almost out of bread." That night, the fire crackled like applause. May cooked with familiar hands, adding dashes of herbs she'd foraged along the way. Hattie set the table. Caleb fetched the extra chairs. Levi found the wind chimes he'd been carving and hung them on the porch beam. They sang with every breeze. Later, when the meal was done and the children asleep in a tangle of limbs and dreams, May stood by the hearth, watching the flames dance. "I didn't mean to leave like that," she said, voice soft. "I know," Levi replied. "I needed to know if I was staying, because I was safe or because I was seen." He looked up, and her voice cracked. "I came back because I was missed, not pitted." He crossed to her then, slow but sure, and reached for her hand. He didn't squeeze it, just held it, warm and steady. "We don't need fixing," he said. "Just a place to belong." She nodded, tears slipping soundless down her cheeks. "And I want to belong here." The room didn't cheer. The earth didn't shake. But something sacred settled into place, like dust finding the right beam of light to dance in. In the following days, the cabin breathed again. May stitched curtains for the windows. Levi built a bench for the children to sit together at mealtimes. Joey began calling her Mama without prompt. Hattie braided Sadie's hair the way May had done. Caleb carved her a thimble from bone, rough but proud. One morning, May found Levi standing by the old cottonwood, staring at the grave marked with Lily's name. She approached quiet, unsure. She was strong, he said, but lonely. May stood beside him. "I think most strong people are." Levi turned to her. "You ain't replacing her. That's not what this is." "I know," she whispered. "But maybe I'm helping you remember what warmth feels like." He nodded. "You are." The days stretched longer. Spring crept in with green shoots and softer mud. May planted wildflowers along the fence. Levi fixed the porch rail. The townsfolk talked, but their words began to change. Some offered nods. A few even smiles. Children from church asked Hattie to play again. But it wasn't society's approval that mattered. It was the moment when Sadie, standing on a stool beside May at the counter, said, "Mama, can we have spaghetti tonight?" May laughed. "We don't have spaghetti, but I like saying it." "Well then," May replied, "spaghetti it is." That evening, she boiled flour dumplings and tomato water until it resembled something close enough. The children called it spaghetti. Levi called it magic. As they ate, Joey smacked his lips and giggled. Caleb reached for seconds. May leaned her head against Levi's shoulder for just a moment, long enough to make the room feel like a church. Later, when the table was cleared and the children tucked in, Levi stood by the door, staring out at the dark. "I keep thinking," he said, "about how quiet this place used to be." May joined him. "And now," he looked down at her, a smile in his voice, "now it sounds like home." She laid her head against his arm. "Home doesn't always come loud. Sometimes it just stays." The fire behind them dimmed to a whisper, casting soft shadows over the floor. The wind chimes swayed in the breeze, singing a lullaby older than words. May looked toward the table, the empty bowls, the carved bench, the scarf Joey had tied around one of the chair legs like a flag. "It wasn't a wedding," she said. "No," Levi agreed. "It wasn't a ring, or a preacher, or a name. Nope. But it was spaghetti on a wooden table," she whispered. "And the way you looked at me when you thought I wasn't watching." He smiled. "And maybe that's how homes are made, one small kindness at a time."